I am Lisa DeSisto. I'm the publisher of the Portland Press Herald, and welcome to RevUp Maine. Thank you for being part of the launch of our new series, where, as you know, startups in Maine can really thrive. We have a great scene, but our reporting has shown that startups need help after the startup phase. What do you do to keep going, to rev up and sustain? And that's the purpose of this new series. So you'll have to let us know if we hit the mark. I would like to welcome our subscribers. You're very special people, and we appreciate you. If not for our subscribers, we would not be able to continue the important local reporting that we do every day. So if you're not a subscriber, we encourage you to be part of this exclusive club. I also wanted to thank the sponsors of RevUp Maine, Cross Insurance, and Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare. And our presenting sponsor is Bowdoin College. Now, who's free on Saturday at 2 o'clock? Because let's make a plan. You know what Saturday is? The Maine State Spelling Bee, hosted at Bowdoin College. Maine's top spellers, middle school students, will be competing in a drama-filled event to represent Maine at the Scripps National Spelling Bee in Washington. So seriously, if you're free on Saturday, you should absolutely come. It's pretty intense. And thank you to Bowdoin College for helping us put this series on. And also, I wanted to thank our new best friends at UNE. It is great to be here in Innovation Hall. What a fitting setting for this discussion this afternoon. So thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the host of the RevUp Maine series, Will Hall, Portland Press Herald business editor. And thank you again for being here.
Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you, Lisa. Thank you to our sponsors. And most importantly, thank you to all of you for being here today. I am just thrilled and, I don't know what's the word, delighted, there are probably others, to be here with you, kicking off the Press Herald's business series of public forums. As Lisa mentioned, this year's series, RevUp Maine, focuses on entrepreneurship. That's a pretty broad topic. It means a lot of different things. There are a lot of lessons that go far, far beyond simply being a successful startup business. So we thought, what better way to launch these discussions than to take a look at the field of what's been called new space. This is an entire industry that is getting off the ground, literally, right now and right here in Maine. So we're going to talk about how and why that's happening, what it might mean for the state, the pros and cons that are involved, and what business people of all types can hopefully learn from Maine's burgeoning aerospace industry. Now, I should admit, in the interest of full disclosure, before we go any further, there is another reason that we're going to be talking about commercial space flight today, and that is, well, starting when I was a kid, I have really, really wanted to be an astronaut. But what little boy doesn't want to? This is an industry that is simply exciting to be around. It is contagious, and I think you'll pick that up from hearing our panelists today. They don't include any astronauts that I know of, but we do have a very distinguished crew. So let me introduce them for you. I'll start with Dr. Shehata here on my right. Dr. Shehata is the executive director of the Maine Space Grant Consortium, a nonprofit that is part of a national network of state-based groups funded by NASA to strengthen research and education in the aerospace field. Dr. Shehata has over 35 years of experience in economic development and building research infrastructure, and is one of the leaders behind the Maine Space Complex and the Maine Space Corporation, which was created by the state legislature to sort of organize this whole effort. So we're pleased that Teri's here. Next to Deri, we have Sascha Deri. Sascha is the founder and CEO of Blue Shift Aerospace. He began his career as an entrepreneur by co-founding the Alt-E store, a company that distributes and manufactures renewable energy products. In 2014, Sascha went on to start Blue Shift, which made history, world history, 2 years ago by launching the world's first commercial rocket powered by a carbon-neutral biofuel. Sascha and Blue Shift are right in Brunswick and are now developing a series of small rockets that will someday be capable of lifting payloads into low Earth orbit and for commercial and research customers. Next to Sascha, we have Karl Hoose. Karl is the founder and president of Vault Enterprises, which is developing the first ever global or orbital launch system that combines rockets and I'm not quite sure I even know what this phrase means, but he can probably elucidate, high-speed, air-breathing propulsion for the small satellite industry. He also founded and led a company called Applied Thermal Sciences, an R&D engineering firm that successfully commercialized cutting-edge technology and captured over $70 million in revenue over a 15-year period. And then all the way on the end, we have Jaimie Logan. Jaimie is the director of Tech Place in Brunswick, a manufacturing and technology incubator at Brunswick Landing, the former site of the Naval Air Station. Tech Place provides a shared workspace for early stage companies in fields such as aerospace and life sciences and many other technology-driven fields. Blue Shift is headquartered there, and our other panelists have worked with or have a connection to Tech Place. So it's kind of a small world. Jaimie began her career as an attorney, practicing admiralty law, and then worked in finance and event management. She has also served as a consultant, a Chamber of Commerce leader, and an executive with the Maine Department of Economic and Community Development. And, well, you've already met me. So to get the ball kind of rolling, I have a few questions that I'd like to ask, and I'm hoping our panelists can just kind of dive in and take on these questions in any particular order, whoever would like to start. And then, if there's time, we'll have some questions from you guys and some prepared questions from readers at the end of the hour. But the first question I have is, commercial space flight has received a lot of attention because of high-profile companies and high-profile billionaire leaders. But the industry is not just about people like Elon Musk. So I'm curious what exactly the new space industry is, how you would define that, and who's part of it. Anyone want to take a stab?
Oh, I'll take a stab.
All right.
Initially, anyways. New space to us was was really when the nano satellite community really started to kind of bubble up to the surface with CubeSat. So nano satellites is defined by NASA, and correct me if I'm wrong, Terry. I think it's still up to 1.3 kilograms. So they're very small. They might be typically, they'll describe it as a loaf of bread, but maybe 4 inches by 4 inches by 12 inches in total length for a 3U CubeSat. But that size satellite really shrunk down because of the advances that happened in electronics. And I mean, everyone's got a cell phone nowadays, so that makes for a pretty good satellite if you were able to get it up in orbit. The problem is getting up into orbit. Most of the launch vehicles are so huge, and so our focus was, how do you develop a small launch vehicle? And that's where the physics kicks in, and the Vault Enterprises use a combination of rockets and hypersonic air-breathing propulsion, which are basically high-speed jets. And if you've heard of ramjets and scramjets, that's essentially what we're using. So instead of carrying all your oxidizer, typically oxygen and fuel on board, like most launch vehicles or every launch vehicle that's out there, we use the oxygen that's actually in the atmosphere. And so we can really decrease the size, because most of the 90% of the propellant that's on a launch vehicle, 90% by weight, is propellant, and majority of that is oxidizer, not fuel. So, and you got to carry all that weight up, which is why it's kind of a dog chasing its tail kind of thing. So.
If I can add, can you hear me out there? All right. If I can add to that, and the understanding what the new space economy is really important about how we got here and how it's enabled Sascha and Karl to do what they're doing. 20 years ago, before 20 years ago, the federal government was a primary domain of entering into space. And then things changed 20 years ago. What changed is that the federal government stepped back and allowed, through various pathways, for not only large companies but small companies, and a key part of that, also investors, to be involved in space exploration and development. So they're driving the agenda as opposed to the federal government. And I'm not only talking about the United States, I'm talking about on a global perspective as well. In addition to that, as a result of that, the advances in technologies have miniaturized a lot of things. Miniaturized the electronics. Now you can go from building large satellites to small satellites. Actually smaller, and even smaller. That to the point now where even high school students and middle school students can develop their own satellites, and working with launch providers to get them there. So that is part of that. And then as a result of the invested community coming into the new space economy, enter Sascha, enter Vault, because they would not be here, unless I'm wrong, without the investment community. Maine is in the beginning of that threshold. And what we're trying to do, what Sascha and Karl are doing, and what we're trying to do at a larger scale, is really engage Maine into the space economy, because right now I do believe that the entire global economy, space economy, is around $450 billion. It's estimated to be $1 trillion by 2040. Why can't Maine take a fraction of that? And why can't Maine develop an infrastructure that not only supports people like Sascha and Karl, but to support an infrastructure that gets our students involved in the new space economy, so when they graduate, they stay in the state, they don't go outside, or those that are outside come back here and be part of this new space economy. So that's what the new space economy is about.
That's very helpful. And if I can follow up, you mentioned a very large figure of potential economy that, a big scale economy. What piece of that might Maine hope to carve off and host here?
Where's Emily? We had, I think when we developed the strategic plan for the space complex and the Maine Space Corporation, I believe we said something by 2030 or 2040, Maine should capture 5%.
Oh, wow.
5% of $1 trillion is a lot of money.
That's
Even 1%, my goodness.
We'll take that.
We'll take a half, yeah. So
a big number.
it's a big number, yeah. And if I have an opportunity, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But
The other thing, and maybe Sascha, this is something you can address. Clearly, the rockets and the spacecraft that we're talking about are not just the manned vehicles that somebody like Jeff Bezos is going to go with, and there are sometimes very, very small payloads or small vehicles that are going up into low Earth orbit. Can you talk a little bit about the types of rockets that Blue Ship is developing and how they're maybe not what people think of when they think of a rocket or what you see on the movie screen?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a lot of association. Certainly for me as a kid and somebody else who grew up in Maine and wanted to be an astronaut, and you get incapacitated by glasses and things like that. So, but yeah, that's certainly where your childhood dreams kind of get your association with it is very large rockets, Apollo era type of rockets, SpaceX, and whatever Blue Origin is looking to develop nowadays. And there is definitely a market for that, but there's also plenty of places around the world to launch those really, really big rockets. Big, and I would add polluting rockets out there. So come the small rocket guys and gals of the industry, and they're thanks to these tiny satellites, they're riding on these gigantic rockets currently next to big satellites. And so the big problem is these guys don't get to go when and where they want to go into space. They always have to ride, not even like coach class. If there's a class that puts you on the wing of the airplane, that's what they get to ride. So they get no priority. And so for some time, I know NASA's been trying to encourage this for years. They've been trying to encourage somebody please come forward as a small launch provider, small satellite provider, where these poor small satellite customers, which are actually growing to be a gigantic industry, and something like a $28 billion industry just to launch these tiny satellites over the next 10 years. Please give them priority and first-class service just so they can go where and when they want to into space. And so that's what we're focusing on. We're going to be sending 1, 2, 3, or 4 satellites like this size. And as Karl was saying, they're the size of bread boxes, just a few, tens of kilograms large. And they're providing services like broadband services. They're allowing us to have cell phone service from the sky instead of from the tower over there. It just happens to be up. Could be providing Earth imaging services so we can monitor climate change or the war going on in Ukraine. So it's it's an incredible opportunity. So the problem is aerospace is hard. Space is hard. Space is expensive. And so you have to do some really dastardly things to figure out how to get the cost down, whether you're air breathing or hybrid rocket engine technologies or using biofuels like us. You have to figure out how to really innovate the cost structure so that you can do a small launch. You're never going to beat the big freight trains to space, but you're going to be a compelling option for that small satellite customer that needs to go to space tomorrow because their satellite just went out of commission and need to replace it. And that's really where the big market is. If you look at the market growth for the small satellites, I just want to say that the new space industry is well beyond satellites. There's tourism in space, and I'm not just talking about Blue Origin sending people up and down or Virgin Galactic. There's going to be a Hilton someday on Axiom space station or something like that. So, no joke. I just lost my train of thought. But the opportunity is around not just the initial deployment of all those tiny satellites around the planet, which is what like SpaceX is doing right now, and others. It's around what happens in 3, 5, 7 years from now, when those satellites just normally are decommissioned. They burn up in the atmosphere. They can't maintain orbit. They need a small launch provider that can replace 1 or 2. You're not going to send a gigantic Falcon Heavy up to replace a satellite that you and I can put in our hands. And so that's where I think the incredible opportunity is, and the timing's just right for companies like Vault and Blue Shift and others, because by the time we're doing orbital launches, that's just when those smaller satellites are going to start falling out of the sky. Actually, that sounds horrible. Burning up in the sky. Won't say anything. And they will be needed replaced. So.
And I can add a little bit to that. And the one of the big differences between the small satellites and the larger ones is, you can do a lot more with the larger satellites, but the smaller ones are you basically fragment the satellite and then put a number of them around the Earth, and that way, you're always getting some kind of sensor, whether it's Earth observation or weather or whatever around the Earth. You're kind of building this constellation of multiple satellites, multiple small satellites, and so that's why it becomes critical that they're able to go into orbit and when and where they need to. Planet, one of the small nanosatellite makers that's out there, they essentially put most of their small satellites, they're 3U, about the size of that loaf of bread, and they essentially put them in a single orbit and then get a number of them around the Earth, a few hundred or so that they can kind of do an Earth observation or take a picture of every part of the Earth once every 24 hours or 12 hours or so. And getting all those satellites in the right position in orbit might take them 6 months, because the small satellites won't have any propulsion on them. They go up, as Sascha was saying, they go up in a large vehicle. They'll have maybe 100 of them, and they'll throw them out the door on the way up. And then they do this kind of drag, differential drag, where they position or orient the satellites. So some of them drag harder than others in order to get them to split up and then hit the right position in orbit. And that can take up to like 6 months, 6 months after you launch.
As opposed to what will we do?
Yeah, if we had a number of small vehicles, we can get them up there in about 2 or so weeks.
Yeah. Go for it.
So, and the important thing too, I think the important thing to remember is that, I don't know if we said it, but these are satellites that are put into what's called low Earth orbit. And so as opposed to those big bus-sized billion-dollar satellites, which are put out in tens of thousands, was it 10,000?
24,000.
24,000 miles. Okay, it takes 1 second for light to get out and come back, another second to come back again. So those basically stay in space forever. Whereas the ones in a low Earth orbit, they're burning up in the atmosphere in just in the course of a couple of years. People also talk about pollution and debris. Sure. The nice thing about that particular area of orbit is they won't stay there for so many, too many years. So.
Oh, that's important. I'm sorry, Terry, go ahead.
Well, I want to pick up what Sascha said earlier, and then let me clarify. The small satellite market is going to be $34 billion in 2030. We wanted 5% of that, but actually we want 5% of a larger industry, which is $1 trillion. So, but let me, if I may, the point I want to try to make is, although we're talking about small satellites and launching with small launch vehicles, what we're trying to do by engaging the state and our young kids as well is not only about launching small satellites. If you think of what goes into the infrastructure, the scientists and engineers, the small components and the applications that result as a result of that, we can have an opportunity here in the state, not only for small rockets and small satellites, but the application that results of that we can take that information and apply it back here in the state to help our industries, both in terms of marine as well as forestry, biotechnology, all of that stuff, and develop other applications that are of a global perspective. So it's not only about engaging in the moon and beyond, but also about taking that information that technology has developed and applying it back here in the state. That's the key part of it. So when we propose the developing of the Maine Space Complex, that I'll talk about later, it's a complex to engage all Mainers in the new space economy, not only in terms of launching rockets and small satellites, but all the subsystems, all the components that we can apply here back here in Maine, that help Maine specifically, but also provide an opportunity to engage other countries and other states in the United States.
That's a really important point, and kind of on the same theme about the infrastructure, for instance. I was wondering, Jaimie, if you could tell us a little bit about Tech Place. There are a lot of things that have to come together if this space economy is going to take off in Maine. Terry just mentioned the space complex, the consortium's work. I would imagine some of it is also having sort of a cluster of like-minded entrepreneurs in one place who are all kind of like, hunkering down and, creating synergy among, a lot of great minds and taking advantage of each other's knowledge and expertise.
Yes. Bingo.
I mean, my sense is that's one of the things that companies like Blue Shift have been able to benefit from at Tech Place.
Exactly. Well, Tech Place is a very unique facility. It is a former maintenance facility at Brunswick Landing, or for the Naval Air Station, that maintained the P-3 aircraft. And when the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority, which is the organization that is guiding the redevelopment efforts at Brunswick Landing, was starting, they had all kinds of large buildings to sell or to rent to entrepreneurs. But they got a lot of questions from smaller entrepreneurs, early stage or startup companies that didn't need 10,000 square feet. They needed 850 or 500 or 1,000. And they needed some access to equipment, and which those companies really can't access. They didn't have anything there at Brunswick Landing, and there wasn't really anything else in the region. So somebody had the bright bulb moment to say, let's take this facility, which is a series of workshops and workspaces, and turn that into an incubator for technology. And Brunswick Landing is Maine Center for Innovation, and so aviation and aerospace are one of the primary focuses of Brunswick Landing and of Tech Place. So it's aviation, aerospace, composites, advanced materials, manufacturing, biotech, clean tech, IT, things along that line. And by creating this facility, which opened in 2015, we have office space by yourself, shared office space, manufacturing space, shared manufacturing space, a biolab, a composites facility, our TechWorks facility, which has a machine shop, a wood shop, and a welding booth. They're all available and equipped for, at low cost, very competitive entry point. So someone can come in and they sign, let's say, a use agreement for a year, but you can get out of it at any time with no financial penalty. And in the meantime, you have a very low overhead. All the services are included. You have your reception, mail service, you've got shipping, receiving, you've got access to 3 high-tech conference rooms. You've got the biggest selling that you mentioned, Will, is the community. There is what is the huge selling point, because instead of just going to your manufacturing space, and you're going there and you're coming back, you are part of a community with many types of industries there. So that's the jam that holds everybody together, and that everyone who comes through Tech Place, and I invite everyone here to come visit sometime, in those who graduate out, miss so much about it is that collaboration, that you're talking to each other, you're helping each other out, you're working for each other, you're helping solve problems, you're pumping each other up. Is that true, as my boss, Christine Logan, who started Tech Place, says, the collisions of innovation. They're happening every day. They're happening every day. Wouldn't you say that's correct? Yep. Yeah. So it's a pleasure for us to be able to provide that space
for those early stage companies. And they're all, and again, by all these industries, and not just the aerospace and aviation industries, but you've got other industries, all of a sudden they're working together and they're solving each other's problems, which is great.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's good to hear that. And Terry, you're also responsible for the consortium. That sounds like a sort of collective approach to advancing the space economy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
We got an hour. Before I do that, just to be transparent, Sascha is a member of my board. Karl is a former member of my board. So this is a small state, just so everyone knows about that. Yeah, real quick, and I'll transition to the space complex, so what that's about. The consortium is part of a national network, and we're funded by NASA, so there's there's a state-based consortium, all 50 states plus Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. And we've been in existence in Maine since 1998 or something like that, and below the radar for reasons that I have, and I've been involved since that time. But we've invested about $24 million in the state's infrastructure, research and education, primarily research throughout the state, University of Maine, Southern Maine, Bowdoin, Bates, and all that stuff. About 4 years ago, I was concerned that, we're meeting the needs of NASA, but were we meeting the needs of the state? All the investments that I've noted that we've made were kind of like marbles in the bag. They kind of bounce off, but they're not aggregated. They're not making a lot of sense to me. So we came up with the idea that, is there something else? And I think at that time, Karl was a member of the board. It was about 4 years ago, and we said talked about the notion of a spaceport in the state. So we did an analysis to find out what is it that we have in the state that would even come close to that, because if you talk about spaceport or a space complex in the state to someone who's never heard about it, they'll say you're real stupid or you're an idiot. I've been called that, and not even believing Maine has that capacity or that ability. So let's look at what we have, if I may. We're close to polar orbits launch in terms of our geographic location, which is critical for these. Well, at least for Sascha. But we're close to polar orbit launch. That's where the industry is going. That's where higher education, the private sector is going. Look at your globe next time, and you'll see, as opposed to equatorial launches, a polar orbit from pole to pole exposes a great deal to the landmass on Earth. That opens a lot of remote sensing activities, a lot of telecommunication, anything. And it's cheaper to get there, by the way, because of the less energy that's used to get into polar launches. Second, we have great assets and resources in two major facilities in the state. The former Naval Air Force Base in Brunswick that has this 12,000-foot runway, something like that, and a lot of buildings. So the cost of doing something would be less. You can renovate as opposed to build from new. We have the former Strategic Air Force Base in Limestone, now being managed by the Marine Development Authority. Same thing. I think Karl was there. You're in Limestone, right?
No, we're actually in Prescott.
We're Prescott, okay.
Yeah.
That's close. That's good. Mock Joe.
Yeah, small Joe. Yeah.
We have great educational resources, institutions in the state, not only in the state but also in New England. We have a small but growing supply chain that is either directly or indirectly associated with the aerospace industry. And we have Blue Shift and Vault as growing startups in launch vehicles. And given where the new space economy is going, we said, okay, let's raise that up the flagpole, and we got many folks involved. And they said, and honestly, initially it said, no, this is not a good idea. But then when we went through the details, we said, yep, that's a great idea. Let's take the next step. We did a market demand study to make sure that people not only in the state but outside of the state, if we did something, would they use these facilities and these resources? And the answer was yes. From there, we developed a strategic plan. and we submitted the plan to the governor and to the legislature in February of last year. One of the key recommendations is to create a quasi-state body called the Maine Space Corporation with a board of directors that would manage the growth and development of the Maine Space Complex. That was passed and signed by the governor in April of last year, and now we're waiting for the board of directors to become live. There's a little process that we have to go through. Now, what is a space complex? Space complex is three-legged stool. When we did our market analysis across the country, there are about 11 spaceports that are approved by the FAA. All of them are spaceports. And all of them had problem surviving, to the point where many of them have gone back to state government and asked the taxpayer money to support their development and growth. We didn't want to do that. What we decided to do is intentionally develop a space complex, not a spaceport complex, that has a data analytic component to it, that will be used with artificial intelligence and machine learning to access the satellite data and other things and provide it to students, to schools, to businesses, and so on, so that they can use. The second is a space innovation hub, where all the research and development innovation would take place in Maine. All what I'm mentioning here are shared resources. That will be located primarily at the Brunswick Landing with a spoke at Loring Air Force, at Loring. And the third is launch sites and services. To support activities like Sascha and Vault, primary responsibility of the corporation is to make sure that these two get what they want. At the same time is to see who other launch providers may come into the state, but not jeopardizing what we already have. It's like throwing your baby out with the bathwater, and we don't want to do that. So that's a space complex.
That's helpful to understand. And it's a very ambitious vision, but to hear you talk about it, it sounds realistic. It sounds, oh yeah, like this is something that can happen. Would there ever be the day, and maybe this is the wrong way to be thinking about it, but would there ever be a day when Maine becomes known as, Cape Canaveral North?
No, bite your tongue. From my perspective, the answer is no. That is a real bad image to convey in terms of what we're trying to do here in the state. We have to maintain the culture, the environment in this state. So having a Cape Canaveral with large rockets, that's just not going to work here in the state. We're talking about small rockets, probably no more than 100 feet tall. The others are talking about 300 feet tall with toxic fuel and all that stuff, and large, make a lot of noise. We don't know the number of launches that will take place here in the state, but we're not talking about Cape Canaveral. We're not talking about the north. We're talking about something that's much smaller, that works for the state, meets the demand of both the international and national community, but certainly never mention in any way, shape, or form that Maine will become Canaveral North. That's not going to happen.
That's good to clarify, to keep that in mind.
And I'll throw in there, Vault, our whole focus is on really shrinking the vehicle size down. So when we put our initial orbital vehicle together, it was to carry essentially 25 kilograms. And the vehicle itself would be about 20 feet tall, 2 feet in diameter, and weigh about 1,600 pounds. So it's very small compared to what you'd look at. It's nowhere near Falcon 9 or anything else. That's the reason why we were initially looking at, hey, can we actually launch from the coast of Maine? Because if you go directly south, like Terry was saying, you go directly south towards the poles, it's all open. We're east enough from the rest of the U.S. that you're just going over open water. So not to mention the small size, a good portion of our vehicle gets dropped off after a mile up, which is just the rocket booster to get the air breather up to speed. We just got to push it over the speed of sound. But the real chore is you have to get up to 17,500 miles an hour in order to orbit the Earth.
Yeah.
So we want to do at least half of that with an air breather. And that's what shrinks the vehicle way down. That's why the launch vehicles are so big.
Sascha, maybe you could talk about this as well. I know your rockets are getting bigger, but we're not talking about a Saturn V.
Right. Yeah, and I think I share Terry's feelings that this is not about Cape Canaveral North. It's kind of like wishing to be Sears and Roebuck, you know, in the modern day. Or I wish I just had a mainframe that accepted cards or something. Really cool in its time, and you know, a lot of us, including myself, have sort of nostalgic opinions and views on that. But the future is getting things smaller, more tightly launched into space, which is what we're doing. And so that's really the opportunity by creating launch facilities. I just want to clarify, what Terry's working on is the three-legged stool. One of it is the launch side. We're actually working on our own private launch site, which is really a small marine platform that allows us to nimbly get out to the waters, launch basically due south over the Atlantic Ocean, and be up and away and out of everybody's way very shortly, and out of, you know, we're miles away from sensitive habitats. So that's the type of thing, as opposed to, you know, I looked at what our launch requirements are for like a pad or this lift boat, and if you just deposit on top of what a SpaceX pad looks like, it just disappears. It gets digested inside of one of those pads. So it's just an orders of magnitude difference compared to what we're all used to. Which is, you know, they're fun stuff. I can't wait to see my first SpaceX launch. I still haven't seen it in person, but yeah, someday.
So there are a lot of opportunities ahead. There have been probably some critics out there who have concerns, rightly or wrongly, about the impact of a launch site, environmental concerns. How do you put that in perspective, and what do you think people should really know about those potential downsides versus, you know, what's going on in Maine?
I'll speak to that just because I've had a lot of town hall meetings. I might take a gulp of water before I talk about that. So yeah, we've had a lot of opportunities to talk with folks up and down the coast of Maine, and you know, the concerns are all entirely valid ones. You know, are you going to pollute my waters? Are you going to mess up my ability to operate in the waters? Carry on my business day to day, day in, day out? Are you going to destroy sensitive habitats by doing this? And you know, we learned when we had an opportunity to talk to, especially a lot of lobstermen and fishermen on the coast. We learned a lot. We went in pretty naive. I'll say we came out less naive, but still, you know, I'm sure bountifully naive. And what we learned is, you know, we learned everything from what the sensitive habitats that were, you know, spoken out by conservation organizations or on state maps, to learning from the locals. No, this part has such and such, you know, bird that's there and nests, and we, you know, it's not on a map, and you just learn that from talking to people locally, or to learning like, hey, we are busy fishing the waters, especially close to the coast. Summer through, you know, basically all of summer, but less so during the wintertime. And hey, during the summertime, we can't even fish the waters on Sundays, for instance. And so we learned a lot of things about the economics of our waters. And one of the things we learned was how to work in a way that's symbiotic with folks making a living off the waters, and as opposed to an opposition or in collision with folks making a living. Because that's the last thing, especially as an entrepreneur and a small business owner, last thing you want to do is mess up somebody else's small or large businesses, especially if it's in other industries. So we came out learning a lot. So I think, and then I think, you know, last but not least, the environmental aspect is at least twofold. It's, you know, it's sound, which, you know, we kind of compensate for that by being far off in the waters, at least 2 miles off the waters, off the coast. And then it's pollution. You know, a lot of these rockets come back down into the water intentionally or unintentionally. And if you look at like the SpaceX types of rockets, yeah, they recover the first stage, but the second stages aren't necessarily recovered. And that's a lot of petroleum products just dumped into our ocean. And while we might think that's okay, I'm not personally okay with that. And I think, if anything, as a species, we're trying to move away from doing that anymore. And so, that's one thing that we're real proud of at Blue Shift is that, if our rocket ditches in the ocean, we can't retrieve it, and we intend to. It will not create an oil slick or contaminate the marine life below, affecting both life and commerce for folks off the coast. So, but it was, I got to say, overall, it was a real learning experience. So, I think you have to be really sensitive, and it's hard because, you literally go to town hall meetings, you have people shouting at you, which is not fun, it turns out. But if you can keep an open ear and learn and constantly look for the opportunities for solutions and many of the solutions never came from my head. It actually came from, in many cases, from other fishermen and folks in the audience who said, well, there's this and this, but you could do it like this. And there was times we actually had to talk to the FAA to find out, could we rework the way we did launch this way or that way so that we could accommodate the way the waters are being fished so we don't interrupt commerce. And sure enough, those are the things that we learned.
And those are some of the things that, were first in our mind. And one reason for going smaller, it's like you have less of an impact on the environment, especially if you're really small. We essentially use a quick boost rocket motor and our propellant is ammonium nitrate, which if you've got any farmers out there, throw that out there for fertilizer. And then after that, we'll use a combination of traditional hydrocarbon, but also hydrogen, which doesn't have any carbon in it. So you're not making the CO2. And the great thing about hydrogen is quick burning, and that's what you need at the higher speed. So that's the direction that we go.
Right.
And also being a smaller size, having less oxidizer on board. The range that you'd have to close down becomes a lot smaller.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then if you're a lot smaller, you also have to, get your acceleration rate's got to be much quicker. So you're not going to take this slow, slow mode up to orbit. You got to get up and go.
Yeah.
So we're out quickly.
That's great. That's helpful to understand. Just to sort of shift gears a minute, because we don't have that much more time, but and Jaimie, maybe this is something you can address, or any of you. In addition to the companies like Blue Shift and Vault and the work of the consortium, the space complex, there are other folks out there in Maine who are looking into the new space economy and are bringing together technology that will be useful in that field. That's my impression anyway. Jaimie, have you seen other businesses, other resources, other things going on at Tech Place, at Brunswick Landing in general that would sort of feed into this industry that's developing?
Yep, we have on site now, we've had one of our earlier tenants was Grayson Aerospace, Daniel Grayson, who does a lot of work that you can't really talk about too much. He was profiled in Maine Biz, I think. They did a thing on Tech Place last year, and the photographer had a hard time getting a photo that would be acceptable because of all the restrictions on the federal government and that not wanting publicity on what the machinery was. So, but he does a lot of work with test stands for rocket launches and things like that. We also have a young man who went through GRU Institute, who's building a hydrogen rocket. He's at Tech Place for some R&D work, and he's elsewhere on Brunswick Landing as well. And we have Daniel from Mallard Enterprises, who's working on a test or a type of aviation project. So we have, there's a lot of space for not just the rocket developers, but all the sub support that you need, the engineers and all the industrial support there. So that's make a lot of room there in Maine for people that can work remotely. They don't have to be on site all the time. They can take advantage of our technology. And I think we're attracting that as a state because we have, especially with the pandemic, people are seeing that they can come to Maine and have that great quality of life and still be on the cutting edge of their jobs with technology. So that's something that we can do as a state to say, hey, you can have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah.
Here and places like Tech Place support
Right.
that.
Right.
And there's a lot of work to be done in data analytics. So, I mean, that's when you're grabbing the information and you're basically utilizing it for whatever industry you might need it. I mean, in this case, for Maine, for forest management, marine sciences, if they could get a snapshot or information in the oceans almost real time, it helps them out in doing their predictions for whether it's fishing or anything else. So it's just a matter of getting the right chain of minds together, and you can really expand this out. We're just one little portion of it. If you look at the budget for this space, launch is actually a really small piece of it. It may change on the smaller scale, but
And
What
Terry,
other-
it looked like you were going to chime in.
Well, yeah, we have, as Jaimie had mentioned, we have great examples of startup companies that are involved in this kind of field. But I don't want you to discount the many garage type electronics that's go. Then push that one. Will you hear me out? No. Now?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Okay. Can you hear me now? What I don't want you to discount is the, and I don't know what the number is, but there's so many entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs in the state, young, middle-aged, maybe old, that are working in this particular field, or they have aspirations. They're doing it anyways, but we don't know about it. This is who are the people we want to bring in, as well as those real, the scientists and engineers to bring them into this new space economy. This is what we hope we're going to do with the space complex, is really coordinate that effort and provide those people the opportunities. Our young kids, our children, our undergraduate students, our high school students, middle school students, they're smart. They're smarter than we are. Every year that goes by, they really understand the electronics, the computer, and everything else, but they need a place to utilize their expertise and their knowledge. And they can't do that here in the state. They go outside. So I think what Sascha and Volt are doing and Karl are doing are showing everybody that Maine can do it. Let's use that opportunity really to bring everybody into the fold and coordinate a real kind of growth and renaissance, so to speak, in the new space economy in the state. But at the same time, do it in a manner that keeps Maine what Maine is all about. That's all I have to say.
I want to tie some of this together because we actually started Blue Shift in Massachusetts. And it was sort of a skunk works within my solar company in Massachusetts. I grew up in Maine. Great example, somebody who tried not once but twice to get a job in Maine and immediately sucked out of the state. Very hard to find a high-tech, I majored in physics, electrical engineering. One of those degrees was here in Maine. And it's very hard to get a good job here. So it's 20 years later, and it turns out there was two key sort of ingredients to get to be the whole company here. One was Tech Place and mRNA, which was the where, and another one was MTI, A Technology Institute. I know really told by a state official in Massachusetts that if we want to do space, aerospace stuff, go elsewhere. I've just been told that in Maine Colton. But it's only, go to California, go to Texas, go to Florida. This one first. And at the very end of the call, they said, Ashley, wait a minute, no, that was that super. They had to have this MTI native. I went, no, MTI that
that provides funding and grants for new startup companies in the tech industry. They're trying to bring that in there into the state. I was like, oh, great, fantastic. So it was, and the other problem with Massachusetts did not want us to test our engine anyway. This is back when our engine was really deeply. We couldn't find many down the acid that is too performing this to test. Whereas tech plays at MRA came up with webinars and said, what would you like? And that's, I think, a real difference about being really, really having sort of an independent steer to get things done. And I think that's a lot about developments, individuals and students are really capable of, or folks that tend to do a lot with their hands and our minds at the same time, not just be purely editing. And this talented, great individuals end up becoming our most popular, or least profitable export, and the largest part. And that is of students going through elsewhere in the United States. So I think it's a bit that there's a lot of great readers. And I also just want to say that I think you heard it, large companies, it's just a small enabler catalog to the new space industry. There are so many other technologies to be created and developed, whether hardware, software, and services, everything in between, that many of the folks in the audience here can create, as well as the youth that are out there in high schools today. Look for those opportunities. The entrepreneurial opportunities are endless. I keep thinking of things I want to do, but there are so many opportunities. Sure, that rocket is the sexy part of it all. I think so, but there's so much more to be out there. It's just up to our innovation, creativity, that we can create in Maine.
This is something that needs to be addressed, and it will be addressed. We have no choice but to address it in order to grow these kinds of companies and bring more into the state. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that it's a great idea, but one of the biggest hurdles that we're going to have is the workforce. But we can do it. We have solutions to make that happen.
And I can throw a little bit into that.
Yeah.
I got just a couple seconds because we actually moved our headquarters up to Presque Isle, way up north, and finding people is one thing. We can get people that are interested in coming out there, but now you got to look at the area, because now you got to look to make sure that people that you're bringing in actually have homes to buy or rent. And that's a big thing. And so is the community infrastructure there. For Maine anyways, we have to hit it in multiple areas. We got to lay that plan out, lay out that whole map, and work it and get the people in the right areas to work that. I mean, that's critical. And I think the resources that we have in the state, I think are excellent. Even though they may not look excellent, I think they're excellent. One of the biggest things is the low population density, because we can do flight testing in here. I mean, whether we're talking about rockets or unmanned vehicles, that kind of thing, we have a real opportunity to be a resource for the other states in New England. There is a slew of aerospace companies in Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island that all go out west to do their flight testing because they've got all the land and everything else out there. But Maine has that in the tip. That's a really good resource. Now we've got Loring in the northern end of the state, Presque Isle Airport too, and the coordination of those two with Brunswick down here is just an awesome.
That's a very good point, and I know we're bumping up against the end of our time, but I wanted to make sure, Jaimie, you were trying to get a word in there too. I think.
Well, I was just going to say that you talk about the size of our population. We are a big state geographically, a small state, number of people, and with my experience in economic development, that is to our advantage, because you know how you say that 6 degrees of separation? Well, in Maine, it's like 1 or 1.5. And we work together. We know each other. It's like because our state is so small, we know who everybody is, and the connectivity is immediate and it's meaningful. And it's not like you don't say, well, call that person. Here's their number. Call them. I call them. You know, I send an email and they introduce the people to it. It's that personal attention that you get in this, I think, very peculiar to Maine. And just one other comment about the workforce and getting the kids inspired. I love to have kids coming through Tech Place, and we get them through as much as we can. In fact, we're working with Brunswick High School, some other local high schools, on internship programs and summer employment, so that they can come in and see what kind of careers and opportunities there are in the trades and in the skilled workforce. But one group came from Rockport last year, and they were in one of the spaces, and Running Tide Technologies, Josh had the plasma cutter fired up to show them, and they all love to share their information with everyone of all ages. He said, oh, and here's the press brake over here that bends the metal, and all this, and the kids, there were about 15 of them, were just rapt with attention. And one young man stood next to me. He looked at me and he said, I could just live here. And he went, I mean, it gets the hair on the arms to come up every time I think about that. He was so jazzed by seeing what was going on, not just hearing about it or seeing about it in a book or a video, but he was right there and somebody was talking to him and showing him that. And this is, I think, the space economy in Maine is primed to really attract that attention, because like you said, Sascha, what kid doesn't want to grow up and be an astronaut, you know, or something, or involved in aerospace, or involved in planes or aviation, or making things. So I think it's a great time to be in the industry in Maine. I'm really excited about it.
That is so great to hear that anecdote, the fact that young people are getting jazzed up about.
They are.
That this is an industry that is worth getting jazzed up about.
Yeah.
There is some exciting things happening. Hearing each of you speak about your organizations and what's going on, it's fascinating. I mean, we could probably talk for another 3 hours, but that probably wouldn't work out tonight. So I want to thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our sponsors. I know there are more questions and topics that would be worth exploring, and you know, maybe you guys will be available to talk with folks. But thank you for your time this afternoon.
There's no time for questions. There's no time for questions. It'd be yourself.